Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you may be. Welcome to our show, Organizing in the Time of COVID. My name is Firoze Manji from Daraja Press. Um, it's been a year since this series of podcasts were developed. The first person I interviewed was from one of the informal settlements in Nairobi, uh, Gasheke Gashihi, who I called to find out, well, how does he see what's going on in relation to COVID, and that sort of set a trend for me to try and understand how those who very rarely get a chance to actually talk to their experiences, how they see their view, how they see the world, what are the struggles they're engaged in. And after all, it is about organizing if one is facing crises and so on. And so that's the origins of this series of podcasts, which we've done more than 100 so far. And some of you may remember a couple of weeks ago, I interviewed Rene Loewenson. Well, she's decided to turn the tables on me and wants me to talk about the series of organizing at the time of COVID. Rene and I go back a long way. We're old friends, comrades, co-activists. Many people don't know that I was in my past. I was very deeply involved in public health, and Rene and I were instrumental in getting Equinet going, and she's got staying power. She's still going strong on that, and she's one of the great intellectuals and activists around the whole issue of public health. So it's a real pleasure for me to bring back Rene to the show. Rene, a warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Firoze, and thank you for allowing me to turn the tables on you. I'm going to have so much fun, and I think the people who are listening are really going to enjoy this opportunity of hearing your own reflections and insights. As you indicate, there've been more than 100 interviews, more than 110 interviews, I think, since you started. Yes, I've been not only your comrade and colleague and co-conspirator and so on, but I've also been the recipient of your sharp insights in many times in the last couple of decades. So I'm really fascinated, and it's a great pleasure for me to kind of hear your reflections, having done all these interviews, having heard some of these amazing people, spanning so many different countries, different settings, different spheres of organizing, and different kinds of sites of struggle around this pandemic. I guess it's one good thing that I can't say it's a good thing, but it's a reality that this pandemic has gone on for so long, that we have been able to build such a body of learning around it over a prolonged period of time that allows us to draw these insights. So maybe I can start with my first question to you. Given this huge diversity of scope, what have you seen that's been common across all these interviews?
I mean, I think the thing that gets repeated over and over in different ways. People have their own vocabulary, their own perspective, the way of expressing things. But what comes across is people put it different ways. Some people say the pandemic has removed the veil from our eyes. It's revealing the real nature of capitalism in all its cruelty, its greed, its racism, its patriarchy, and on top of that is this growing awareness of the existence of and the expansion of two spaces, a protected sacred space where the elite live and in their protected villages, as it were, and the rest of humanity, which is condemned to the sacrifice zones. And that's been a sort of something that's come across in so many different spaces. But the other thing that I think comes across and it's part of that, and that's everywhere you get the same message kind of, the tendency for the state to use violence as a way of dealing with a pandemic. And by creating these sacred spaces, they see themselves as protecting themselves from those they consider less than human. And so, those first things that the Kenya police did was to round up people and have them lying on the ground. And in the first period, they killed more people than the COVID virus did. The coronavirus, and people are becoming very much aware of that. And I think what I sense is in many places there's growing lack of confidence in the state and government. And
can I ask you though, is that any different to the previous crises, the financial crises, the ecological crises, the climate crisis that was gripping us just before? Is there something about COVID that's made that more immediate or more unique or in some way different?
That's a good question. I think there is something different. With the climate crisis, there's a sort of diffuse blame game. Yes. And a level of denialism as well. But here, I think it's to do with the militarization of the streets. I think it's to do with the use of violence and I mean, as you know, a couple of women who I interviewed from one of or a couple of the informal settlements in Nairobi put it. The situation is already terrible. Okay, and all we are seeing is not a dealing with the pandemic. It's not dealing with the health problems. It's exacerbating the patriarchy, the violence, the harassment, and the killing. And that really struck me because so much of the media at the moment talks about the vaccine being the solution to this. And it's like the technological fix that they think, take this and all will be well. And it's quite clear from these interviews that not all is not well. There's a new normality in there's no going back. That's another thing. There's a transformation taking place. And I think it becomes much clearer that where the media talks about deaths and numbers, what I'm hearing from these interviews is the human story, the political story, the story of organizing.
Right.
And the other thing that comes across is that, we talk about the global south, but what become clear is that the global south exists in the global north. If one looks at the conditions of the indigenous people in the Americas, it's horrific. And it's the same corporations, the same businesses which are involved. The other striking thing that I learned, I think, that sort of emerged was the extent to which, the factors leading to climate crisis, the factors leading to patriarchy, the nature of racism, these are all rivers which flow into the same sea. They're all mixed together, okay? And I think there is a growing beginning, I think, of growing understanding that you can't separate these. That the deforestation, the industrial agriculture that Gates and Agra and so on promote are creating the conditions for the migration of viruses which normally circulate in a particular ecology to pass into environments where
Are you
there
hearing
is
that being
zoonosis.
articulated in your interviews across? I mean, we all know the wonderful interview you had with Rob Wallace, for example, was very clear
Yeah,
about that. But I wonder how widely you're hearing that
I,
articulated from just ordinary people on the ground that are organizing.
I, I don't think so. But I think the conversation is beginning to open up on that. I mean, I think
Mm-hmm.
it's seen in more crude terms in that um, people are increasingly aware of how the rich are getting richer and the
Mm-hmm.
impoverished poorer. Okay,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
I think there's a receptivity to interpretations on that. It's by no means something that's universal, but I think the connection between different forms of exploitation, whether it's patriarchal, whether it's racist, whether these are people are aware of these things,
Mm-hmm.
and their lived experience, and the sort of land grabbing that. I mean, like in Nairobi, Kariobangi was destroyed, a whole informal settlement where people actually had title deeds were just overnight destroyed and grabbed. The land was grabbed,
Mm-hmm.
uh, and normally this takes place in other areas. Not quite sure. Suddenly, it's happening to us. It's happening here,
Mm-hmm.
and I think that's
Mm-hmm.
the thing that I think is beginning
All right.
to open up. But is
One,
this
one.
this? Sorry, yeah.
No, please carry on. You're in the middle of a
No,
sentence.
it's just that I think there is this feeling that um, the our ruling classes are more concerned about looking after their own health and their followers than it
Right.
is about dealing with the pandemic. So there's well, if people die, well, that's fewer problems for us from
Yeah.
that point of view.
Yeah.
And
I
that's
mean,
the sort of
this.
thing you're getting. So I think in that way, that's how it's different from the other major crises, because it not that isn't so explicitly experienced. So people are talking from an experience, not so much from an intellectual analysis.
That's really interesting. But then I guess it raises the question of there is a sense when one talks about this global experience, it's a global pandemic, of a kind of homogenizing expression of as though we're all in the same boat, and you've already explicitly raised the fact that we have the global south and the north and so on. That
Yeah.
has that what have you seen that's been unique to particular settings or particular regions, or that it needs to be recognized, and if not even connected with, in trying to build a more global process around this, a global
Well, I think there's
understanding rather.
how little attention is paid to success in controlling the pandemic. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
we're not.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, look. I mean, one of the earlier interviews we had was with an activist from Cuba, and she explained how the Cubans not only doing this on an international level, which they're well known for, but domestically, what the key thing that they put across is that you cannot do this from the top down. It has to be community organizing, and health
Mm-hmm.
workers have to be available to support the struggles of communities. It's not the other way around.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's completely lost in the corporate media. Same thing
Mm-hmm.
with okay. So Cuba, you have a sort of socialist thing. So oh well, that's a different. Okay, so we talk about South Korea. I mean, South Korea has not banned one flight, even from China or anywhere else. Why? Because they've got an efficiency. They don't have a public health system as such. What they do, but for this COVID, they have organized. I mean, Everyone gets text messages every day saying where new outbreaks happen, what can be done. People are encouraged to organize around that. The public health service is, in a sense, being reborn in Korea. The
Ah,
same in Kerala. I mean, Kerala is, one of the poorest bloody places in the world. But what an extraordinary achievement, right from the moment go. But again, they understood this has to be the subject of community organizing. It cannot be done the other way around. Yes, health officials can help stimulate, get people organized, saying, yeah, this is the way. Because there is such diversity in different communities, we have to take the account of the specificities. None of us have enough knowledge about all those specificities, but those communities do. And this willingness to allow people to make their own mistakes. I mean, if self-determination is about anything, it's the right to do that. And I think that's been really impressive. Haiti, in spite of the earthquake, the American occupation, all the tragedy, the community organizing that's going on there has been extraordinary. China, people keep, today everyone's again building up military war against China, lots of propaganda about it. But the reality is, they've dealt with it on an extraordinary scale, and so it is this organizing that I see really encouraging, and we see this within the trade union movement. We see this in all sorts of places. I mean, the struggles. It just came up in recent interviews from the mining indaba in South Africa, and the alternative mining indaba. And again, they spoke to this issue that actually it is about, it's so tied into this whole question of being able to say no to the corporate ventures. But in this context of COVID, they are able to say, no, we know how to deal with this. We have a right to be heard on this. And I think that's really, really exciting.
That raises an issue in a sense of like some of the examples you're describing, Cuba, Kerala, etc. There is a background history. This is not new, a completely new step for them to organize in this way. And I guess what I'm interested to find out is from your interviews is to what extent has COVID brought something unique to organizing? To what extent has it created new spaces or new sites of struggle or new forms of struggle that were not there before? Or has it essentially just intensified what was there before?
Well, I think it has intensified what is there before, but there's this myth that people have to think before they act, and what the crisis has shown is that it is only in the engagement of struggles that you learn how to think. Okay, and what we are seeing, I think, across different places at different moments, different degrees, is that by engaging, by realizing that you're being shot at by your own police, that you're being locked up, that you're being harassed, you're being attacked, you've got violence in the home, you've got violence everywhere. There's the response is to organize, and in that organizing gives birth to the new world. It gives birth to new ways of organizing, new ways of seeing things. And I think that is, there's the old saying, flowers bloom on shit. When they're surrounded with this kind of shit going on, there's 1,000 flowers blooming, okay? And that's not to say it's inevitably going to lead to any major change, etc. But we have to listen, we have to watch, we have to understand the dynamics that are going on, that are helping to create that future, that's helping to create new ways of organizing. And I think there's a richness of experience. I think we've hardly covered most of that.
Can you elaborate a little bit further on some of the strategies that or some of the new ways of organizing that you're talking about? I think it would be useful to just understand those a little bit better, and especially the impact of this whole the breakdown of the atomizing of people from physical distancing in COVID versus the traditional ways of organizing, to what extent have people been able to work around that and generate momentum and build social relations that are necessary for both thinking and acting?
Well, I think there are two worlds. There's the world of the sacred space and the world of the
The people.
sacrifice zones. Yes,
Yeah.
and for the middle class, like here we are. We've got computers, we've got ability to internet and so on. We can talk to each other, we can organize, and we can do the best we can in that situation. But the reality is, for most people living in our cities who live in those sacrifice zones, in those informal settlements, in those barrios and so on, whatever you call them, there is no practical way of social distancing. They live on top of each other. They live in crowded environment. There's no sewage. There's no water. There's nothing. But there's conditions that create crime. You have to organize. So there is organizing for crime. Okay, I mean that's traditional. And it's just exacerbated. Okay, but what I see happening, and it's especially young women who are doing this, that's what comes across to me, is they are saying, no, we have to bring this together. We have to support each other. We have to, and it isn't, what I hear the inklings of is not, oh, this is just a women's problem, but by the understanding of the situation, they begin to think in larger terms, that their role is that of everyone and not just their interest group. So there's certain universalism appearing. And I mean, I think the biggest example of this has been the in India farmers' struggles. I mean, the COVID situation created major crisis for many small farmers who are unable to get their harvest to market. So they were really suffering. At the same time, people in the cities weren't getting the food, and so and the prices went up. Who was benefiting from that? Okay, and so I think this has been an important part of, once the state starts saying, no, we're going to introduce laws which will marginalize you even further. I think I don't think you can separate those two phenomenon out, and so you see this major organizing going, and I mean it is extraordinary. So I do think sorry.
No, it's an important point you raise, is that there is, and I heard it in your interviews, this constant sense that we can do what we do, but we also need to broaden our alliances and we need to make connections. Sometimes for survival, like the issue of food, to make those links, but also for the kind of change we're hoping for. And I'm intrigued to know where are you seeing these broader alliances being made, or is this still a task that's lying ahead of us from what you've been seeing from the interviews? I heard a lot of people articulating it, but how much is it actually happening?
Well, I mean, I think people understand that need, but I think I would put it broader than forging alliances. I think it's a lot to do with, through the engagement around their own experiences, they're learning there's a universalism appearing that all of us in our communities are facing this, and we have a responsibility to take that on. And out of that comes, well, can we ally with you? Can we work together? I think it's still early stages in that.
Were there settings that particularly struck you where that's moving ahead more rapidly that would be interesting to listen to?
It's predominantly where there are struggles already happening, where organizing is already happening. Back to what I was saying, that's how people learn how to think
Mhm.
it's in those situations that I think. So you see in the Niger Delta, in huge environmental destruction caused by the oil companies, etc., the complete destruction that's going on there. Uh, People recognize they need to connect with each other. It goes
Mhm.
beyond the sort of political factionalism as well.
Mhm.
Uh,
Mhm.
in South Africa, it is around the struggles around mining and the right to organize around that you begin to see the same thing. The
Mhm.
reaching out and
Mhm.
connections with different movements.
Mm. Mm.
So I think
Mm.
it's a product of struggle, and depending on the depth and wealth of that experience of struggle, so you'll see differing levels of
Right.
consciousness about that. But it's not
Right.
purely a tactical thing. It's, in a sense, it's organic. Uh,
Right.
the recognition
Right.
that we are human, uh, and
Mhm.
and and in a sense, it's more than that. It's partly a proclamation that we too are human, but it's
Mhm.
also a process that says we are inventing what it means to be human. That we
So
are,
that's an important point. This notion of people inventing themselves, their role, but also their world. And I'm interested in how far you've been able to sense from your interviews more than a reaction to a bad situation or a problem, and a creation of a vision of what the world could look like. You talk about the farmers, for example, how durably people are recreating that as a kind of, this is what we want our future to look like. Um, how far have you seen? Because again, it's been only a year, although it has been a long year.
yeah.
How far have you seen the emergence of the alternative vision?
I I
Um,
I think in varying degrees. It's, as I said, it's a function of the degree to which people have organized, or and it is the creation of a new world is born in the loins of struggle. It doesn't happen
mhm.
separate from that, and
Mhm.
but I do think, I mean, going back to our example about Cuba, I mean, their internationalism is a function of
Mhm.
their understanding, because of their own struggles, of what it means to be human, and therefore the solidarity of that. And
Mhm.
I think solidarity is a key thing, because there's a really good definition of solidarity that I heard at a conference I was in, and it's what love looks like on the streets. Uh, and it's exactly that, because it is a recognition of other people's humanity, and
Mhm.
that to the extent that they remain repressed, so your lack of humanity is exposed, and so long as they
Mhm.
are advancing it, so your own freedom is it. I think it's a really important one, and it's
Mhm.
one of the interviews that I did, was on the politics of love and rebellion.
Mhm.
And we had people like Margot Okazawa Ray, we had Robin D.G. Kelly, we had all sorts of other people. And it was a fascinating discussion, because all of them, whether you were talking about the queer non-binary activist Trey Freeborn, or you're talking about people working on the Chicano and Chicano studies,
Mhm.
everyone was saying that these organizing that's going on, that the responses are fueled by a sense of love, and that, I think, is really important for us to
Mhm.
understand, that if
Mhm.
politics is not about an expression of love of humanity, what the fuck is it about?
Power.
I mean, yeah, well, no, well, but that's it. It's a disaggregating ourselves from our own humanity. And I think the
Mhm.
struggles that
Mhm.
we're seeing are, I mean, another common thing I think I've seen across nearly all the interviews is this expression that of kindness, of warmth, of
Mhm.
uh,
Mhm.
it comes
Mhm.
across so so amazingly, and it doesn't require much prompting. People,
Yeah,
talk
yeah,
about that.
yeah, yeah.
And I think that's
That's
really
interesting. I mean, you've talked about Cuba and the sort of the sense of internationalism, and I think that's resonated with some of the dialogue that's taken place around global public goods and around solidarity in
yeah.
resources and so on. But I wonder, are there other particular sites of struggle where you think this will increasingly grow through, that you think are going to become more and more important as a result of the pandemic and its underlying rivers of all the other financial, climate, ecological,
Right.
civilization destruction
Yeah.
that's been going on? Are there particular sites of struggle that have emerged from the interviews that you see as
And
critical?
I think there are probably two we can talk about just on this continent in North America. One is the struggle of indigenous people and the issues that
Mm-hmm,
they are taking on. I mean, if one looks back at the struggles around Standing Rock, what was fascinating about that was, first of all, this was not a territorial claim. It wasn't saying this is my land.
mm-hmm,
It was the capital W, we. This is,
mm-hmm,
we are
mm-hmm,
engaged in struggle because it's important for the whole of humanity. Okay,
mm-hmm,
in other words, you saw what was a localized struggle becoming universalist.
mm-hmm, mm-hmm,
Secondly, you then have, as in response to that, veterans of the US Army, the armed forces, coming there and kneeling and seeking redemption.
wow. I haven't
Yeah,
seen that.
yeah, no. So this is the what happens when there is that expression of a universalist humanity that I think is really important.
Mm,
We're seeing the same
mm,
struggles happening around the abolitionist movement in the prisons, uh,
mm-hmm,
and and an understanding that it is not about just opening prison doors, but the creation of a new way of dealing with
mm-hmm,
the loss of humanity, the loss of love,
mm,
that is the basis for creating violence and creating so-called
mm,
crime.
mm,
And I think those are really important. I think you're seeing this in the women's movement as well. You're seeing
mm,
the emergence of that understanding that goes beyond merely a uh, a, a gender definition. It
mm.
is growing beyond that. So I think it's encouraging. But at the
Yeah.
same time, we have to understand that the ruling class also understands this profoundly and seeks all
Mm.
sorts of ways to destroy it using violence, using manipulation,
Wow.
playing people up against the other. You know,
And
in that
maybe
sense,
now information technology, vaccines, other technologies being used to atomize and create competition rather than to
yeah,
create that sense of
absolutely,
universal humanity. How do you
yeah.
think that the whole dialogue on vaccines in COVID and the way information technology is going to be used to create access for some, vaccine passports and so on, how do you think this is going to play out around these struggles? What do you think is going to be the impact
Well,
of
I
the
mean,
vaccine?
I I, I think um, one of the things about all technologies is that it amplifies and exacerbates existing social divisions. Okay, it
Mm-hmm,
always does that. Okay,
mm-hmm,
because it's not neutral. It's
mm-hmm,
in the hands of a particular class, and so what we are seeing, I think, and I hopefully it'll blow up more. But I think it is that this issue of who gets the vaccine and at what cost, partly, but who gets it reveals the actual real nature of this cruel, vicious system with its inbuilt patriarchy and racism and its hate for those in the sacrifice zones. And I think
mm-hmm,
that's what it's revealing. But I don't think there is sufficient yet uh, widespread organizing around uh, forcing these what are commodities back into the public domain as part of,
Mm-hmm.
because none of them can claim to have done so without a social and financial input from society. And I think, you know, this is something that we really do need to organize around, but it has to go beyond just appeals to WTO. It has to be organizing on the ground, and I think that I would like to see more of, but I've yet to see sufficient organizing on that basis. There's a tendency in the health sector, I think, for us to curtsy to the specialists, to the experts, and um, I think the experience that you've had in Zimbabwe, where you've helped communities organize to take control of their own healthcare, how they've organized, and so on. It's that kind of organizing that I hope we will see. But I think it's still early days yet on
Is it, I mean, you've used a quite critical word there in that sentence about control. We see a lot of organizing around access, but how much organizing are we seeing around control of the production and the means of production? And linking back to your earlier discussion about food and land and so on, is that in a sense, how far are these struggles around the more immediate issues rather than the deeper underlying issues of control and who's in power to make those decisions about control?
Yeah. I think, in these various struggles, these issues come up, but it takes a while before, because the issues is who decides what is produced, how it's produced, for whom it's produced, who benefits from it, what's done with the surplus, all these fundamental questions, um, which we used to ask a lot about in the 60s and 70s. I think that questioning of that kind has been lost to a very large degree, and I think there is a need to begin to re-question this. And I think, take the vaccine. How is it produced? For whom is it produced? Who benefits from it? All these things are questions that are central to it, and it is about self-determination. It's the right to claim that you are in control of your future, that you can decide what your future looks like. The problem is we're living in the situation where late capitalism, neoliberal capitalism, is in a situation where it individualizes experiences. It breaks up
Right.
social identity. It breaks up that connection of the we rather than the me. And I think
So
that's where the problem we have.
is the emphasis on self-determination not on the self, but the determination, and you're actually talking about collective
Absolutely,
self-determination? Yeah,
absolutely.
yeah.
Uh,
Mm-hmm.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
and but I do think that on the left we're not good at listening to the experiences of those who are trying to get that way, and so
Mm-hmm.
because we not necessarily listen, we're not hearing what is happening on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
and
Mm-hmm.
without romanticizing it, I think we do have um, an opportunity to see in these kind of crises where people are taking that initiative. And I think the Via Campesina organizing around food sovereignty, about challenging corporate
Mm-hmm.
agriculture. All these are, I think, part of that process, and it's
Mm-hmm.
diverse. Of course, it's diverse.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but the conditions
One
are
thing that struck
diverse. But
Yeah. One thing that struck me about the dialogues we've been having around community organizing is how dynamic the situation is. How sometimes a
Yeah.
process that looks quite successful, if you measure it in an event, can actually go through quite a long period of counter reaction. As you say, there's various power struggles and battles for ideas going on, and that you have to have quite a long vision around some of these struggles. So I guess it raises a couple of questions for me, for you. How long are you going to carry on doing organizing in the time of COVID? I know that you've been going back to some of your previous interviewees and talking to them again, and I think that helps to understand the dynamic nature of both the learning from action that you're talking about,
Yeah.
but also, sometimes having something in writing tells the history in a way, whereas a podcast can be quite ethereal, quite event, this
Yeah.
is where we
Very
are at this particular
ephemeral.
time. So I'm interested to
Yeah.
know to what extent, how have all this electronic media forms, have they enabled us? And a lot of people don't read anymore because they get their information on social media or online or whatever. What are we losing from not reading books? And I know
Well,
Darito
I mean,
also produces books.
but we're losing two things on terms of social media and this isolation and having to use you know technology to communicate. And we're losing that touch and feel and sense from when we're together, and the thinking collectively we lose. You can think so far with this, on
Mm.
screen, but because it's not merely words, it's
Mhm.
expressions, it's connections, it, the personal discussions that happen. That's we're losing that a lot in the sort of middle class side of things. Okay, I think people have so I think what podcasting does, it at least allows voices and experiences, yes, which are ephemeral in a sense, but they're there. We're building up an encyclopedia, as it were, of those
Mhm.
kind of struggles.
Mhm.
Um, but books are important, and certainly from the teaching that I've done at Carleton, one of the things I realized is how difficult it is for young people to read uh, substantial amounts. And it's partly to do with that they're not stimulated to that. And so one of the
Mm.
experiments we've carried out is to produce short pamphlets, which are not a substitute for books, but are a way of introducing you to some of the ideas to
Mhm.
stimulate that thinking. I think books are
Mhm.
important in the sense that they allow deeper thinking. And one of the things that the policies that we've had is to say all of our books, if the authors agree, should be available for free or download as PDFs. If you want it printed, it's going to cost us, it's going to cost you. But otherwise, we want to make those available. And that's been quite successful. A lot of downloads take
Mhm.
place. So that's great. People are accessing uh, uh, these materials. Um,
Mhm.
but the
Mhm.
other
That's
thing is
brilliant.
also in both podcasts and in publishing books is not merely reacting to proposals that come in, but seeking out, saying, look, we need something to address this particular issue that will help create an understanding.
Mhm.
And I think that's where publishing becomes really fun. I mean, because
Mm.
you're making something happen. It's not merely a
Right.
mechanical production.
So is there a sort of relationship between the issues and the learning that's being thrown up from the interviews and the kind of issues you are looking to do deeper book publishers on? Is there a sort of organic link between these different forms of knowledge that you're building?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I'll just bring up our home page here, because I think this is um, um, if one looks at, for example, the small pamphlet on the revolutionary meaning of the George Floyd uprising. It was to speak to an actual thing which we we've talked about in terms of the racism in the UK. This whole issue of being human is another area that we've tried to work. So there is a close interrelationship there where we have For the Love of the Struggle memoirs from El Salvador, and that provides a podcast as well. So there is this interrelation. It's not being fixed by any one medium, but there's we are only one of many really interesting organizations who are producing these kind of podcasts and publishing books, which is just fantastic. I mean, it's also overwhelming.
Yeah.
But it's important. That's and talking about the written word. I mean, the volume and the editing and the quality of materials that are produced by the Equinet newsletter. I mean, it's phenomenal. And I know, there are lots of people who contribute, etc., but I know who the engine really is.
But I think you're raising a kind of quite a critical thing that we need to do better, which is, we used to do it a lot in the trade union movement of taking the information from experience from members and then the information from literature. And we had lots of kind of interesting literature at that time. And then connecting it to the discussions around organizing, the very basis of organizing. So there wasn't three separate things going on. There was an interaction between all these different forms, and the mechanism that we used with things like the study circles or the trade union circles or things like that. And I guess what I feel is that we need to be doing that better, because otherwise you have a lot of information, but not necessarily that deep connect to organizing that you were talking about earlier.
I agree with you. I mean, I think we could do much more of that. One of the most successful ones we've had has been a book very early we published called Jackson Rising, the struggle for Black self-determination and economic independence in Jackson, Mississippi. And one of the most fascinating things, there must be, maybe 18, 20 groups who contacted us saying, we've got a reading group, we've got an organizing group. Is there any possibility of getting copies at a discounted price? And it's just so exciting, that that the issues and things are being debated are of relevance, and people want to learn from that experience collectively. Now, how far they are able to do this now in this environment of emphasizing social distancing rather than physical distancing. I think there's an important distinction. And the ruling class wants social distancing because it allows a fragmentation. And we want physical distancing just to keep each other safe. There's a big difference. But you're absolutely right. There's much more of that work that we need to do. But it's interesting that how many, especially amongst women, readers groups that are forming, and I think that's a really important development. I mean, it's been going on for a long time, but I think it's much more in this period, and I find that there's a lot to learn from that.
Yeah. And in Scotland, the young people have walking groups, so they walk and talk and read. And in New Mexico, they have round tables for food. Maybe when we can now begin to mix a bit more, we can do it over different food that's been locally produced. So I think there's plenty of opportunities to have great ways of mixing the kind of the information from experience in your books and the organizing. But Firoze, it's been really fascinating. And creative ways of linking them to struggle. I hope you're going to carry on with these interviews. like Pambazuka News, which you launched and was a former editor of some time ago. These things have a life of their own, and people want them. So please do continue,
Yeah,
because
no,
I
no,
think
no.
they're
I mean,
really
I have every intention of carrying on.
great.
One of
That's
the
great. Did
difficulties
you?
has been, yeah, it just
Sorry.
where I live, my internet connection is terrible. But decided just to carry on anyway.
Oh, join the
Um,
people at Matari. Um,
yeah.
I guess in that respect, then, if I had to give you a wish list, who would you like to interview? Who's on your wish list to interview? Given all the things you've been
Okay.
saying
Oh
in
my.
this interview, who would give us who
Yeah.
would
I mean,
you really be fascinated to interview?
I'd like to interview KK Shalala, popularly known as Shalala Teacher, Minister of Health for Kerala. I think
Aha,
there's a wealth of experience and understanding that I would love to have her share with us. Um,
great. Well, if colleagues from
I,
Kerala are listening, please help to make that happen.
yeah, yeah. And another one is someone like Roxanne Dunbar Ortiz, who's written a lot about the situation of indigenous people in the Americas, and there are others as well who I think would like to have much more presence in these podcasts. But there's one
Mm,
other person which may seem a bit odd, but one of the greatest thinkers, way in advance of everyone else, on on technology and its impact on us is Pat Mooney, who was the founder of
oh,
the ETC group. Uh,
mhm.
Extraordinary person, and actually doesn't live very far from where I am at the moment, and I feel guilty that I've not been in touch. So Pat, if you're watching this, I'm going to get on the phone and have you on our next show. But no, it's really important because I think there are this capacity to think in long term, the long arc of history,
Mm,
and to understand what is going on, which is so hidden. And I
mm,
think he's an extraordinary, an exceptional individual in that sense. I mean, the
mm,
list could go on, but those are just sort of some dimensions of those who I would like to have.
mm. And given the long term, are there any in the younger generation? And I know a lot of your interviewees have been very young, especially some of the young women interviewed,
Yeah.
they've been really impressive voices. But are there people who you think really speak for the voice of youth around this current point that we're at in time?
Yeah, I mean, I think those who've been involved in again, it's those who are involved in actual struggles. So that's why sort of the George Floyd struggles was really important, something to connect with. Um,
Mm,
it and one has to look. I mean, in Tunisia, the organizing that's going on, and in many other places. I mean, we've had people talk about Syria, and I mean, I mean, one group I'm trying to get involved again for another round, but with more depth and that is around the Rojava struggles in Syria, and I think
mm,
those are really important. But again, it's because that it's an organic struggle which opens up new ways of experiencing the world, and from whom we have a huge amount to learn because they've organized and created under most extraordinary difficult conditions the new world
mhm,
that all of us, when we get a taste of it,
mhm,
would like to have what
mm,
she's having. Yeah,
mm, mm, mm.
yeah.
Feroz, thank you. Well, I do hope
No,
you get those interviews because I think we'll all be listening to them. And thank you for the insights. It's rather demanding to ask you to think across 100 or more interviews, but you've given us a really rich meal of wonderful ideas and insights and that you've shared from the experience of doing this. And I hope
well,
you'll do it
thank you for
again.
doing this. Thank you for arranging this, because uh, one of the problems in our lives is that we end up doing so much and not giving ourselves time to reflect and be present, and
Hmm.
learn from what we're experiencing. So thank you for doing that. It's been a huge help.
It's what you talk about. You say we learn from action, and this is a form of action. So you've been doing the learning, and we've been fortunate enough to have shared in the learning from you.
Uh,
So
I can always rely
it's
on you saying nice things to me, Rene.
wait until the interview is over.
Okay,
So
well,
yeah,
many thanks indeed. And
uh,
I look forward to being in touch again soon. Don't leave the studio yet, while I close the show, and let's talk further. Thank you,
yes.
Rene
Thanks.
Loewenson, the great one. Take
Thanks,
care.
Firoze Manji.
Okay, bye.